Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Office Hours podcast. This is episode 68, and we are happy to welcome back Mo. Just before we started, he started telling me some crazy story of some legacy code base, and we both thought that would be interesting enough to start with that.
Um,
So, please, Mo.
actually, I don't know if it's that interesting, but I was just sharing my
It's as
experience with this
interesting as you'll
legacy.
make it to be.
Let's see, because what I was just saying was so I got these codes, and it's .NET, and I'm not really that. I mean, I worked a little bit with .NET in the past, but it's been a while now, so I had to. The code was actually in Entity Framework 3.5, I believe. Yeah, and first I need to. I couldn't even. That particular version is no longer even supported. First of all, so I couldn't run the code. I just have it, so I don't know what to do with it. So first I'm thinking of like converting it to ASP.NET Core, and I learned new things, like interesting things about like the .NET environment, just while looking at it, because I feel like they really support a lot of the products, and they have a very interesting ecosystem. It's like everything is inside that ecosystem, And I mean, I know this, but it's just been like a long time. I kind of forgot.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know. I feel like they earned a little bit of my respect now, and I'm just like trying to update my Visual Studio. Initially, I was doing all this work on my Mac, which because like I said, I'm kind of used to working on Mac, but yeah, now I realize that why suffer when you can actually do the work on a Windows computer? Like it's just it's just at the end of it's just an environment. Do you
Hmm.
prefer to work for Windows?
Um, I think it normally doesn't really matter because usually I just SSH into like a Linux server and work that way.
Oh
So I
man,
guess
it's so
one benefit
fancy.
of working on a Mac is that I can just use the POSIX environment that's on a Mac directly. So like all of the tooling is pretty much the same. You can get all of the or most of the things that you get like on a Linux machine. Uh I was gonna talk about it because I started working on a little side project for which I need to build a new site, and so I just needed to start something quick. So I'm just doing it on like my Windows machine, but even without the
Mhm.
WSL, just like running Node straight up on Windows machine.
Yeah.
And it's a bit more friction just straight up on Windows, but it does work, which is kind of neat. I can run it and
Well,
everything. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, but I don't know. I don't know if you wanted to finish your story. I was gonna ask you like if it's working, why do you even need to upgrade it?
To be honest, so there are different parts of the application, right? There is the services, which is the services, and then there is like the other side, which is supposed to be like the UI side. And for the services side, I got a bit of success. I was actually able to run it, to actually start it up. But for the other side, I don't know. Everything is just like everywhere. I don't even know. I'm not even sure. I don't even know. I feel like I need to document like everything that I did on the first side so I can like replicate it. But
That's
I was
probably a
just
good
trying
idea in
things.
general.
To be honest, I was just trying a lot of things. And yeah, it was crazy. But the reason why I'm moving to Visual Studio is because like I feel I was going through like some again, why I said like the ecosystem is really nice is because like for Visual Studio and .NET in general, they have like a very good support, like tutorials and stuff like this. And apparently they have some tools that can actually help you move your code. Like
Hmm.
the yeah, there is this Yad or something like this. whatever. It's a YA something something like this. Yeah.
So is it yet
And
another something something?
yeah, something like this. Yeah. Yeah, something like this. Whatever, I forgot the acronym now. But yeah, you can run it in the terminal, and then it can help you to upgrade some of your dependencies and stuff like this. And that was nice, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't really done things like this with .NET before, so I felt like, you know what, I feel like they have a good support for their old tools and like stuff like this. So I was like, yeah, pretty impressed. So we'll see how much fun I have with the new environment now. So maybe this is gonna help. And also they have Copilot in there. So yeah, this should be nice. This should be nice, you know. So we'll see.
Yeah, well, that's fun times. I haven't touched Entity Framework in the longest time, but I remember that link to SQL was pretty cool. I don't know how much link you had to do in your work, but it was
Oh man.
pretty neat. But
Oh.
yeah, so good
Mm.
luck. Good luck with that. I think that there's I think the nice thing about that ecosystem is that mostly there's a path forward. I think the core, unless you're using some really bizarre APIs and you kind of mostly stick to what the ASP.NET provides for you, you can probably migrate to core. And it's overall, when I left that .NET life, it was in a pretty good spot, I would say. They were kind of moving in the direction that is decent, like untangling everything from having to have Visual Studio, untangling everything from having to run on IIS and Windows. Like you can now deploy to like Linux and
Mm.
Mac with Core. You can just download the runtime itself through NuGet and have all of your dependencies. So it was shaping up to be an environment that if I kept working in it, I probably would have enjoyed working in it quite a bit. I mean,
Yeah.
I mostly enjoyed working in .NET because Visual Studio has obviously very good support for it. But yeah, it's been a while.
Code or Visual Studio
No,
Code
like
or
Visual Studio proper. I think Visual Studio
yeah.
Code has decent support for it too, but like Visual Studio proper, in terms of having all of that stuff, it was really
Mm-hmm.
good. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I think too. Because like the stuff I was watching on YouTube, like they were just recommending to use Visual Studio
Mm,
proper,
right. Even
proper, like
even
you
like
said.
even Visual Studio Express, it was decent enough. Like if you could not afford a license for Visual Studio, like the full version, you could kind of get by with Visual Studio Express for ASP.NET, like for web work.
Yeah, web stuff. Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe.
So,
And yeah, I mean, it's looking nice. It's just that it's a different. I
hmm.
would say it's a different, very different from what I have been working with for quite some time now. Like you
Yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
No, I
it's
get
just
that.
nice.
Yeah.
It's just nice to see people who actually build some of the tools actually talk about the tools that they actually build, and you can
Hmm.
listen to them directly. I
Yeah.
haven't heard anyone from Ruby or anyone. I mean, Angular does like conferences,
Hmm.
so I guess you can
Well,
hear
Ruby
from them
Ruby used to
directly.
do it too. Rails used
Used
to do
to,
it too. I don't know. I
yeah,
haven't paid attention. They probably still do. I just haven't paid attention to that
maybe I happen
side in a
to,
while. Yeah.
yeah, because I haven't really heard it. I mean, there was a RubyConf not too
Hmm.
long ago. Ruby conference. You know what? I take that back. Yeah, there is a. Maybe I just don't pay attention to it. Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah.
it is what it is.
Yeah.
It's nice. How are you doing? Enough of my stories.
I'm doing all right. So as I said, I started working on like continuing work on the side project, and I have to build a website. It's kind of just like quick and dirty. It's gonna consume a data from an API from a system that's already in place and just render it in a nice way. So I was like, well, I need something quick, and might as well try the latest greatest next JS with like the
Ooh.
app router and the server
Mhm.
side components. And while it's certainly interesting, it's like, oh my God, like this whole new server client separation for your code is such a mess. I think that people who use it, every time they say how great it is, it's all just a massive cope because I just started working with it, you know.
Mhm.
I mean, I know about like the server side components for React. Like I heard a bunch of stuff, and I heard from fairly involved like technical stuff about how it works internally. But in practice, you know how I guess back in the day when you write JavaScript and you started switching to promises, but because
Mhm.
you didn't have any sort of like IntelliSense or like the language server support,
Mhm. Mhm.
you wouldn't always know if the function is returning you a promise or not. Like, do you have to then on it? Do you have to await it? It's like, is it async? Oh, now everything turns async. At least now with TypeScript, you can tell, like, oh, this returns your promise, so like you have to wait it at least. But with this server side and client side, well, Angular doesn't have any of that, so you probably have no idea what I'm talking about. But basically,
Well, well, I
well, okay,
mean,
maybe I'm presuming, but since I know you don't really do React and you don't really do Next.js, and not too many other
uh-huh.
frameworks actually support like server-side components for React, I made an assumption that you don't. If you do, I apologize. But I
But
guess
go on. I mean,
for everybody else's benefit, I'll try to give my crappy understanding of how it actually works. But
mhm.
basically, they make the compiler or the bundler smart enough to understand what code is meant to be running on a server and what code is meant to be running on a client. So if you have a bunch of stuff that runs on a server and renders on a server and doesn't really have that much interactivity to it, Next.js can just return the rendered HTML to the client, and it understands where the dynamic portions are, and then those get bootstrapped client side, and it sends the data over what are they calling it? Server side events, I believe, is the protocol. And it like
Mm.
sends the data. So you kind of have this mix of server side and client side, which is it's pretty neat because all of that server side code doesn't need to be part of your JavaScript bundle, so your bundle size shrinks, because if most of it can just live on a server and just spit out HTML, you don't need to even send that code to the client, because like what is it going to do there? Like it just gets HTML and just hydrates it. So in terms of its architectural intentions, it's really cool. But now you used to write code and then even in older version of Next, like in your file, you have a function that runs on a server that like preps all of your data and then it sends it over to the client and then client renders it. But now you can have a server-side component that contains a client-side component, but not vice versa. You can't tell if it's a server-side component or a client-side component just by looking at it. And when it fails, it normally
Interesting.
fails like close to runtime, or it doesn't fail like like the TypeScript wouldn't tell you that it's gonna fail. Like for instance, you have some client side component inside a server side component, and you say, oh, I want to use an on-click handler, but on-click handler doesn't make any sense in the server context because there's nothing to click for. It's just HTML, right?
Okay.
And so
Okay.
it
Okay.
fails at compile time saying, oh, you can't do that because this is a client component and you have to like wrap it specifically in a specific instance of a and it's just like, oh man, FML, like I have no idea just by looking at it whether or not it's supposed to be the server side stuff or client side stuff. I have to go in the file, and at the top of the file you need to say use client or use server to tell the bundler where it belongs to. So now you have to do this sort of
Wait,
sit-ups.
hold on.
Yeah.
Is what you're referring to as you know what? I feel well. What you're referring to as server-side component and client-side component is what probably what we call like a DOM component
Mm.
and no.
Well, kinda, sorta, because technically the job of a server-side component, among other things, is to load the data on a server. Like one cool
Mhm.
thing about it is you can write await fetch in your component, and that code will actually be executed on a server. So you don't need to proxy your requests or anything like that. And so in a
Yeah.
in the same way, like
But
before, like if you have a dumb component that just renders stuff, and then you have a smart component that like deals with how the data gets there. In some ways, server side is a component. Like that's what I was actually going for. It's like you can't just mix them in one. You would have to extract a portion, make the server do all of the data loading, and then specifically designate the component as a client-side component, like pass all of its children, all of the data through the props. And then that thing is the one that like can do on-click events and effects and like all these other things on a client.
that's an interesting architecture.
It's an interesting architecture. It's just, if you remember reading the article, What Color is Your Function? Which was talking about how once you like have some asynchronous stuff in your flow, now everything's tainted and everything has to be asynchronous. Otherwise it like doesn't really work. So in this case, it's kind of similar, only the ergonomics are shit because you just really have hard time remembering. Like in the previous version of Next, I had this issue where there's code that runs on a server and there's code that runs on a client. And if you accidentally structure your imports in a way where, like, let's say you have some code that it has functions for a server and it has functions for a client, and then you have like an index.ts that exports from both of those files, which is fairly common to do, right? You kind of like have this one place. So when you say like import from source feature whatever, and it like actually pulls in like from all the different files internally, so you can just grab it from there instead of like saying import from source feature blah 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 dot client.ts, right? Because it kind of gets unwieldy. So your client code imports something from that file, and on the client, when it imports from that file, it's going to import everything that file imports, and eventually it hits like some server-side code, and that server-side code says import node:/fs, and browser is like, I have no idea what node:/fs is, but instead it gives you some really cryptic error. And you like, oh shit, like what's happening? Oh, your server-side imports have leaked into your client-side imports. It's like, oh crap. You have to like analyze your imports to understand where that happens. So that's like pain in the ass because it's not obvious.
How could that even happen?
Well, like let's say, okay, like in my case, let's say I have a logger. So I want to use that logger everywhere in my code, and that logger is server side because it depends on cryptography module to generate hashes or generate random UUIDs. Because when a new request comes in, I want to generate a UUID for tracing purposes, right? And then there's also a browser logger that has to be separate, because if I put it in the same file, as soon as the client imports that function, it attempts to import crypto and fails. So now I have to split them. And it's just
what are you doing on this website? UUID. What are you doing with it? What are you doing on this website?
No, it doesn't really matter. It's just an illustration of how poor the ergonomics are, because they're trying to make it seem like the client-side code and server-side code is kind of the same thing, and it just magically somehow makes it work. But the more they put themselves into that corner, the more kind of elaborate ways of fixing it they have to invent that screws up with ergonomics even more. So that's why I'm saying, like, people who have been using it for a while and saying how great it is are probably coping really hard. Because for me, I just started it 3 days ago, and I get into it and I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ, like, what is this?
Yeah.
It's overcomplicated. And now I can't do certain things that I would do in my previous paradigm of working with single page applications. And the other thing is, because it's so smart for doing the server side fetch and all of that stuff, it again kind of forces you to put your logic into your UI, and it kind of kills me on the inside a little bit having to do that again. But otherwise it doesn't really fit well into that entire paradigm, so I don't know, it's kind of screwy.
People say a lot of good things about it though. I mean, boy, like any other tool like that. I feel like nowadays, the- there will be a lot of evangelists for
Yeah.
every tool that you have, and those evangelists get a lot of traction. Someone says it's very nice, everyone says it's very nice. They just need a conference for it, and then they say it's very nice,
Well,
and
I mean, it
we
makes
all follow it.
sense. Like if you're an evangelist for Next, it's just a straight pipeline for you to host it on Vercel and pay them money. So it's a marketing person for Vercel effectively. Whatever.
Yeah,
But
everyone likes it. I mean, I don't know. Honestly, we use it a little bit,
mm,
at work. So I kind of know about it. It's just like I don't really tinker with it so much. I just
mm,
know how it works and this setup and all. But anyway, it's interesting to see how the you describe like your architecture like in React. I mean, it's not so different like that with Angular, except that maybe we have a little bit of the way the files are organized. But yeah,
yeah.
we have mostly similar structure. Honestly, it's been a long time that I actually did a lot of React, but yeah, maybe one day I'm gonna do some more stuff, and then we can exchange ideas.
Every couple of years they just come up with something new that completely like screws everything
Yeah.
else that they used to do before. It's like, oh, it's hooks, and now it's server side rendered components and like all of this stuff. And I don't know. I don't know what's gonna happen in 5 years to React, but
Do you see
every time it gets crazier and crazier.
do you see it becoming like a framework, or you see it staying as a library?
I don't know. Hard to say. Uh, I don't know. Honestly, uh, there's a bunch of stuff happening in the ecosystem. I just haven't really been paying attention to it that much. So
Good stuff or bad stuff? What do you mean good stuff?
no, it's just a lot of different things, like different frameworks, different libraries. There's like Astro next, Nuxt. There's plenty of things that are happening. What's the name of that other one? I think I mentioned it before, but I can't recall it off the top of my head now. It's more of like a framework for building frameworks. Vike. Um, there's
Hold on.
too many things
Hold
to
on,
play
Vasili.
with. Not enough
Hold on,
time.
Vasili. Um, can we take a pause?
Yeah,
Pause.
sure.
Would you believe that instead of
Hydration
me
break.
starting recording, what I clicked on was start virtual camera?
So you haven't been recording this entire time?
Oh my God.
Okay. Um, well, we can use the audio. We can just plug in the video. I'll have your picture. I'll just take a snapshot and be like, you'll just be stuck in something like this. Because I don't want to lose all of the conversation.
Oh my God.
It's fine. I had an entire episode where the video was corrupted entirely. I just used a static image, but at least we're gonna have video for the second half of it, or second 40 minutes, last
Oh my
40
God.
minutes.
Anyway, now we're recording now. So
Yay,
we're
let's
good.
resync.
Oh my, oh my God. Oh my God. This is so bad.
That's a first.
This is so bad.
Well.
Anyway, where were we?
Next frameworks, whatever. I mean, we're still where we were. Like all of that is gonna
Yeah.
go in. Just I'm just gonna try to find some really silly frame of you, like looking like particularly zonked out, for comedic effect.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
deserve it. To be honest, yeah, for sure. I deserve it. I was just about to like check. Um. Anyway, it's
It's
okay.
like, how many minutes have we recorded? Zero? What?
Yeah. What? Anyway, it's okay. It's
Yeah.
okay. So yeah, actually, what I wanted to talk about today was about the architecture stuff. Like I wanted
Mm-hmm.
to actually bring it up because a while ago I was telling you about hexagonal architecture,
Right, right.
and recently I came across. You know what? I came across this guy, clean architecture. Do you know about this one? He's the clean code guy.
Mm.
Do you like this guy,
Clean code?
Uncle Bob? Maybe you
I
probably
mean,
did.
we
I don't know.
talked about it before. Um, I, I don't. I think I don't. I don't really have any particular opinions about it. Um, I don't think that I use it personally in the way that is described. I probably wouldn't even be able to tell you what the primary tenets are because I usually have my own ideas about it. But
So
anyway, so what are you thinking
yeah,
about it?
backstory. I mean, there are certain devs. I mean, maybe not. I feel like in my own, in my own current generation of devs, I feel like many people from this side actually really hold this person to very high esteem, and maybe rightfully so because he has like a lot of good ideas, a lot of explains a lot of things about how certain things should be done, especially when it comes to like organizing your code and like what to do as a dev, stuff like this. But the issue I have is that sometimes there is there is the rule written in the book, and then there is common sense, you know. And then there's literally these two things are not the same,
Right.
but they should be used together, you know. So sometimes you might have like certain situations that, oh yeah, Uncle Bob said this, but bruh, you're not gonna go and just say because he said this, then you have to do it, even though like we don't do stuff like this. It is
Blasphemer! You dare doubt the word of the Holy One? How dare you?
we don't do stuff like this, you know. So anyway, I have my reservations about it. Also because, you know, I mean, for me, I did not learn to work from people like this. I mean, you well, anyway, I have my reservations about it, and I'm not gonna blast it like that. I'm just gonna say like, if you read stuff like this to work, if you learn to code from books like this, good. But there is also like the common sense part of it to understand when and where, so to use it, you know. And yeah. So for example, okay, let me ask you a question. Yeah, are you the type of person, would you say you recommend, like, let's say you want to name a variable? This is very like small stuff. Like, do you want to name a variable? Would you prefer to name it as a sentence or like um as a as I mean, say for example, you want to name a variable is supposed to something that is you know what I'm trying to say,
I
like
think roughly, yeah, yeah, yeah.
some people will say, "Oh yeah, Uncle Bob said the name of the variable the name of the method should explain what is going on." In I mean, I get
Well,
it,
the name
but
of the method. So I am actually quite particular about it, and I give people a
but
lot of grief in code reviews
yeah,
about naming.
okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Specifically about naming, because I mean, I may not agree with the entire premise of clean code, but certainly things like method names should reflect what they do is
Mhm.
kind of obvious. I mean, duh.
Yeah,
You
but
want to know what it does.
you
But
don't want a
okay,
sentence.
you don't want to send. But okay, so if you have a sentence, that's a smell. That tells you that it hasn't been broken down well enough. Like if you have to use a sentence to describe what this method does, it probably is just overly complicated, right? And so,
I
usually
think
the
so.
grief that I have in terms of naming is like, well, first of all, like the name of the variable should reflect what's in it. And a lot of times, what happens is through refactoring, they change the thing that goes into the variable, but they never update the variable name, and now the name does not reflect
Mm,
what's currently in it.
that
And
happens to
it's
me.
like,
Yeah, you're
okay,
right.
well, you have to change it because it no longer makes sense
But
for
is that still
somebody.
refactoring though?
Huh?
Like if you do a refactor and you change the behavior
Well,
of the
maybe it's not even.
existing.
Well, refactoring is not supposed to change behavior, first of all.
Exactly. So the name
But
should not change.
well, it should not change the behavior of the method. It can change the
Mhm.
internals of the method any way it wishes, right? It's just as long as the inputs and outputs remain the same,
The same.
then refactoring is fine. Even if it's not a refactoring, because a lot of times people build code iteratively, Like that you start with a function, you outline some variables, and then you like as you work through it, as you add tests, as you refine it, you rewrite it internally a bunch. So sometimes I see somebody submitting an MR and it's like 25 commits in the MR. So they like tried a bunch of different things and finally arrived at something that they're willing to submit. And in that process, you started at point A, you named it a certain way, and then you arrived at point B, but you kept a name that has more sense in the context of point A, right? So now, if I look at it, it's like, why is this variable called X, but the content is actually Y? Like, that doesn't make sense, right? And the other thing is like the methods. Like, there's a special place in hell reserved for people who name their methods does thing, and in the meantime, not only doesn't do the thing, it like mutates some global state or calls some side effect or like
Oh,
writes a file or does some crazy shit that it's like how am I supposed to tell that by the name alone? Like I should be able to tell it by the name alone. Maybe I can tell it by the name plus a combination of types used for parameters and outputs. But like if you do that
yeah.
stuff and then internally, like if I actually go into the source code of the function and it like reads a file and it says update customer or something, I'm gonna slap you because like seriously, what the shit?
You know what? Well, I feel your pain because these are things like we all go through. I mean, sometimes it's like this. The only thing I was gonna say is like for me, I like principles. Like we have a lot of these things. There is this single responsibility. There is this um
So you're talking about solid in
ex-
this case specifically,
yeah,
right?
all of these things.
Which
All of
there's
these things
like
are there, but
there,
there's also
yeah,
common sense.
there's a
See
lot
what
of
I'm saying?
questions. There's a lot of questions that can be directed to solid because it sounds good on paper, but then in practice, a lot of the time it doesn't really quite make sense. I remember there was like a series of blog posts about kind of going over everything, single thing in solid, like the each piece of
Mhm.
it, piece by piece, and kind of highlighting that there's a lot of situations where it doesn't make sense. I think the same thing it can be said about. I think any formal architecture or pattern, you can find things that are lacking, right? And
Yeah.
ultimately the thing about it that was I was gonna say is, you know, before you break the rules, you have to understand the rules. So
Yeah.
if you understand why they chose to pick these particular constraints for this particular methodology and you internalize that and you know how to apply them in most cases, you now are kind of graduated to the level where you can like bend and break them when necessary. The problem is that when you start bending and breaking them when like just because and you have no idea why, then it all turns kind of into a bit of a clusterfuck. So you need to understand why it's there in the first place before you can
So I
creatively
feel like
bypass it.
we probably have the same idea about it. We feel the same way about it. Because for me, it's good to know about it as a um it's good to know about it because it helps you to make good decisions as you
Mm-hmm.
work. But sometimes you have to pay attention to the scenario here. So for example, you could say one thing I don't like to see is when I see like a lot of repetitions in the code. Say for example, I see a method that is doing the same thing. If I see two, three, four methods literally doing the same thing, but you're trying to explain to me like, oh yeah, you're trying not to reduce coupling or like make
Mm.
it a single responsibility. For me, I'm looking at it like this is not efficient to me.
Mm.
But you could argue with it like, oh yeah, single responsibility principle, but there is also the DRY, don't repeat yourself. So
Yeah,
you
that
need to find the balance,
you need to find the
you know?
balance. And again, even for dry, like don't repeat yourself, it's all well and good. But the thing is that there are things which are deceptively, they feel like they should fall under dry, but they don't. Like you have
That's what.
functions and they have just teeny tiny, slightly different behavior. And if you you're like, oh man, these functions are doing basically like 95% same thing. Let's refactor it into one. I'm just going to give it some parameters to dictate
Yeah.
the behavior. And then it turns into this unreadable monstrosity with like 5 different switch cases on the inside. And it's like, did you
No.
really refactor anything? Did you make it easier to
No.
understand? Did you make it harder to understand? You know,
This is not.
no. I'm saying specifically for the cases
Okay.
where it's
Okay.
not, you cannot refactor it into a single function because they are not the same. They look the same, but they are not the
Yeah.
same. And I've encountered it a bunch where it's like, it's really hard to generalize this because every single function is a special case. If you have like 5 functions doing the same thing and then the 6th one is a special case, by all means, just have that extra optional parameter or whatever. But usually what tends to happen is if those functions are high traffic, a bunch of code flows through those functions. When people start adding new functionality, where are they going to put it? They're going to put it in that function. They're going to add another optional thing. They're going to have some kind of flag. They're going to pepper it with like Boolean conditions all over the place to kind of fit their new logic on top of the existing logic. And that thing grows and grows and grows and grows. And in the end, it turns into something terrible that nobody really understands anymore. And that's why a lot of times, if you just kept those 3 slightly different functions alone, long term, you probably would have been better off.
This I agree with you completely. I feel there is a. I also like when you have, so your functions should not be that long. I feel like the moment you have, it's like paragraphs. Like if you write, you don't write. You have to keep your paragraphs in certain lengths. The moment you start getting out of this length, then yeah.
You haven't
You
read
need to.
any Russian classics, have you?
Not in Russian, maybe.
Well, not in Russian, but even translated. But
Is it
yeah.
usually like that?
Well, no, I mean depending on the author. At first, I was gonna say you haven't read any Ayn Rand because, well, she's Russian, but it was translated into English. But she uses definitely like the Russian approach at writing. So you have these massive chapter, just massive, like long, like 2-page long paragraphs, like.
Oh.
So again, Carmack makes a really good point about short functions. Is that locality is important too. Like if I have some method that fits on a page and does a bunch of stuff in a single method, someone's first impulse would be, oh, we have to extract a bunch of these code into functions with like reasonable names and then aggregate it all together. And his counterpoint to that is that before you have the entirety of the code on your screen in front of you, you can read it all, you can reason about it all. Now you're going to break it down into a bunch of functions. Every time you hit a function, in order to understand what it's doing, you have to jump somewhere to read what that function is doing and then jump back. So all of this constant jumping back and forth between all of those functions, because that's going to inflate the size of your file, right? Like if you have to extract all of these functions and name them, and like it's going to make them no longer fit. So now you have to move around. You have to move around.
You get a bigger screen. No?
Well,
No.
the point is, if it's a single unit that you can read and understand in one go, why break it up? Like, what benefit do you gain? You might not gain any. It's just the desire to, again, it's the desire to blindly follow the rules that say everything, that like the function must be tiny and well named, and if it's like longer than 6 lines, your life is shit, and like quit the profession.
Let's name this rule. We should name this rule. I feel like I haven't come across actually any rule like this. Maybe we could call it if we get to put our names together, what would it sound like?
I think that's a bit presumptuous. I'm pretty sure we're not the first and not the last who have discussed this.
We might as well just brand it already. Because I mean, what I'm trying to like get to here is like, if you have, in my own opinion, if you have like long functions, I feel like this is, apart from the fact that you're following the rule, I feel like it gets complicated if you really don't, because there will be, depending on how the codes are written. So if you have like a bunch of if and else or stuff like this inside the functions, like I guess maybe you can say you're reading it like this, but then again, you have like cyclomatic complexity at some point.
Yes.
And this makes you probably have some runtime issues and stuff like this at some point. So
Well,
you
function calls
probably
are not free either, right? I mean,
what?
well, I guess a lot of it gets inlined and optimized by the runtime, but that's besides the point. But function calls within themselves are not free. Like, you have to allocate your stack frames, you have to copy your parameters, like, you have to return, you have to clean up after yourself. If we are talking about straight, like, C style language, function calls are not free. Um, and I guess most compilers are probably, again, the compiler would be smart enough to optimize it. But that just goes to show how great the compilers are, not necessarily the other
Well,
side.
well, I would pay more for this function code. Let me just say in my own because the reason is I feel if you break it down, you can optimize each part of this code and you can maintain each part of it, and you give it lasts longer. You can reduce how soon the code will age.
I'm not saying that like every massive function should remain massive. All I'm saying is that there are some cases where
It's
the
better, right?
propensity to break it down into bajillion tiny little three-liner functions with names isn't really serving you as
Fair
much
enough.
as you think it is, you know?
Fair enough. Maybe, but I really never thought about function calls being expensive. Actually, this is
Well, okay, maybe not expensive. I should have said that function calls have cost. Maybe not a high cost, but cost nonetheless.
that made me think about something now. We a while ago we were myself and some guys at work. We were talking about when you do integration tests and then you take like screenshots
Mm-hmm.
comparison. We were talking about it and we were like, this is a bit expensive because you know how like the pipeline in the test, the tool will try to do a compare each pixels and
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
stuff like
yeah.
this, and
I think
this takes a
New
lot
York
of
Times came up with that a bunch of years back.
yeah.
I'm pretty sure it was one of the big newspaper. They like open sourced their solution for um like pixel matching to see if anything is like off the alignment or
Hmm.
whatever, where they like diff two pictures to see if anything's like moved or shifted around. I think it was New York Times. I could be wrong, but that was like a long time ago that I heard about it the first time around.
Yeah, interesting. Anyway, so like for us, we are moving from like Cypress to Playwright right now.
Mm-hmm.
So when we were using Cypress, everybody just used screenshots. Why do I need to find locate each of the elements on the screens? Like, just take a screenshot, compare both. You're done. Your work is done. Yeah, go, voila. But now, then we had like I think to run all the tests, most of it was taking about 20 minutes, 15 minutes, 15, 15 minutes. And then we decided like, okay, like we're moving to Playwright. And in Playwright now, like we have this like really strict um rule. It's not a rule, it's just like we try to hold each other accountable to make sure that we're not we're not just putting pictures in. At least try to test and get to the end where you feel like, yeah, okay, you can't really test this without like. And these things are like what? Like maybe you want to test like how some elements appear on the page and like stuff like this. But now, I guess what I was trying to ask you was like, how do you feel about like even taking pictures? Do you see it as a necessary evil, or like do you see like, yeah, we can always avoid it?
I think it makes sense where you want to achieve at pixel perfect visuals. Like if you're actually aiming for no, like when you're, it's useful when you make like big refactorings and you want to make sure that at the end it stays exactly the same. I think it's really easy to test it through doing screenshots, because then it literally tells you if it's exactly the same, good. And then, because for me, integration tests are more about functionality. Like, you're supposed to end up at certain business process, or if it airs out in all of the expected ways, you arrive at the places you need to arrive in those cases, right? So for me, that's what the integration tests are for. If you're building your integration tests based on screenshots, that could work, I guess, but to me the purpose is a little bit different. Because for integration
Exactly.
tests, I want to say, like, oh, if I started a user registration flow, by the end, I want to observe some record in the database somewhere. It's not about just seeing the you have been successfully registered thing popping up on your screen, right? Like, I actually want to see that line in a database saying that that user indeed did register. And screenshot is not going to help me with that. It actually
Okay.
can give me a false sense of security where the badge appeared on screen, but it actually didn't happen, or something like that, which is important for an integration test specifically, I would say.
Yeah. So this is my own opinion of integration test, right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel it should be like with especially I don't know if it's the same thing in React, but in Angular we have like enough tools for unit tests now. Like Angular already like they put a lot of effort into
Oh, really?
the testing. I feel like they do.
Because it used to be pretty
I,
shit. Like, you generate a new Angular component and it gives you this stub for a test, and you have no idea what you're supposed to do next, and there's no documentation for it. You're like, go
oh
figure it
no,
out.
no.
That's why
Test bed,
I never
you
wrote
want
any kind of unit test for Angular components, because I just had no idea how to do it, because they never tell you how to do it.
well, I feel like when you finally figure it out, like I think we also have like even more documentations about it now, and it's not just testbed that we can use now. Now we have Spectator as well as like some other tests. Even in Angular now, we have ng mocks, even for your mocks, and you can more easily have your services, your whatever you need. Like I feel right now it feels a bit comfortable, right? So like you can do a lot of things. You can test with test bed, you can actually test like what is like the element in your UI. You can test, confirm, verify the texts. You can verify like
Mm-hmm.
some properties and stuff like this, attributes even. But for me, I find like if you could do as much as this in your unit test, if you have a solid unit test, right? Your integration test should just be like you want to you want to verify or document the behavior, not like just functionality, because at functional level you can keep it a unit. And you want to verify like the behavior of the UI in certain scenarios. So for example, if I say, for example, you have like 10 checkboxes, you want to see like, oh, if I remove one of these checkboxes, what's it supposed to be like the color of the text that removes like, oh yeah, this kind of things. I mean, I would say you can use it as an addition, but what I notice right now is that I find a lot of people really just because of how integration test is, they find it like maybe, oh yeah, we have to always do integration tests. Like every time you write a new functionality, you have to integration test it. But maybe it's not a bad idea. It's just that for me, I find it a bit more expensive than if you actually put in your time to do a bit more comprehensive unit tests.
Well,
You know,
they're ultimately,
maybe
and
this
I
is
definitely agree
I
with
don't
what
know.
you're saying. That there's the tendency that, like, oh, any kind of changes, we have to run the full suite of integration tests against the website. And I think that tends to happen where the logic is not encapsulated, and it's kind of like spread all over the place. And changes in one spot could inadvertently affect something in a
Mhm.
different spot. Because, like, I don't know, like we on our current website, we have a system, let's say, it's an abstract example, it's not a concrete example, but it's based on what we actually have. So I can just speak about something. We have a subsystem that manages the user's profile. So like when you log in into the page, it talks to the profile server and it returns back like your name, address, all of these things, right? So it can be inserted for personalization purposes in a website. And then there's a separate subsystem that deals with users' consents. So whenever they interact with some third-party system, if they haven't consented for data sharing, it like shows you a prompt saying, hey, you want to talk to these guys, therefore you have to agree for us to send them some of your data, right? And the consent system is based on the profile system because the profile payload actually contains the consents within it. So once the profile information loads, it also notifies the consent system that like, hey, here's your array of consents that this user currently has, right? So you do with it whatever you want. And so in theory, I could be working on the profile system, for instance, and make some changes that I did not intend, and all of a sudden the consent portion just completely got screwed up. Which in our case, it wouldn't necessarily happen because we have like strong type safety across. So if we make any drastic changes, the compiler would complain. But in a hypothetical, let's say we made a change and consents are no longer propagating. So every time they go places, it'd be like, hey, you haven't consented to this. You haven't consented to this, even though they technically did. It's just, it's not connected anymore. And you can do all of the unit tests in isolation for the consent manager saying, given these inputs, you do your thing and we expect certain behaviors. And then unit tests for profile servers say, given this user's profile, we expect the certain fields will be populated with these values, right? And both of them in isolation are going to be fine. But because they are interdependent on one another, without an integration test, you're not necessarily going to catch that.
Yeah, true. You see, in this case, you need an integration test here. And this will be like a very good use of integration test. But you see, the one that I'm talking about is, let's say you have like, say you have a new UI. Let's use a model, for example. Like you built a new model, and maybe you have like new buttons on the model or something like this, and then you are deciding like, oh, I mean, you could. It's not totally wrong. I'm not saying it's wrong to use integration tests generously, but I'm just saying that I think it is expensive, because if your reason to use integration tests is say like, oh yeah, if we change our style, or maybe someone changed something in the SCSS or something like this, you want to catch it, or like someone changes how. I agree, but I feel like if you really want to do this test like this, I feel like you have to really do it, because you want to know everything that is going on. So you have to take account for all the elements on that page. You have to take account for everything, and you have to make sure like if anything actually happens, it's not like you do it halfway, but to do it fully, it's quite expensive, I find.
Well, the thing is, it's really hard to determine what gets affected by your change. Like you have to be super intimately familiar with your entire architecture and what depends on what and what links to what. And it's really hard to do. And for most people, it's practically impossible to do unless they touch every piece of the code base at any given point, and they have the mental model of how it all plays together. Because a lot of times people work on their small little sections, and they don't really appreciate how it all plays out elsewhere based on what they're doing, right? And so they say, like, you could try to devise a system which would be like, oh, you touch this file, it imports from those subsystems, so we have to retest those subsystems, but those were not like, it's just too complicated. It's cheaper to just do the whole thing, and if anything fails, then something failed. Go figure it out, right?
Yeah, but I also like, I feel like there is also like another layer of test for this. And this will be like the end-to-end test. Like when you have like all your, before you go to production, you want to test that everything works as it should be.
Right.
Like, not because like you made a change here or you added a new feature here, then it broke something in the other side. I think at this level,
it's true. But now we're effectively saying at which of these layers should any particular test be placed, and like how to make that determination. Like, Is the
Yeah,
screenshot does the screenshot make sense in a unit test or like a component test, or does it make sense in end to end, or like it every team sort of develops their own understanding and their own style for where they do it. And maybe sometimes as a newcomer you come in and you're like, oh, you guys do what? But it works for them, so like who are you to
yeah.
judge, you know?
No, I'm not judging at all.
No, I'm
Honestly,
not
at
saying you
all.
are. I'm just saying that.
For me, I'm just trying to, I guess I'm trying to like share my opinion and also to learn from
Mhm.
your opinion as well. I find like it will be it will be a better use of resources if we are able to determine when each of these things should happen. You understand? Like, but
It would be
it's a
good.
bit
It would be good.
uh,
I
but it's the
agree.
lines are usually very blurry,
That's true.
because usually
Well,
you can argue for any reason, like
you
say
could. As I said a couple of episodes ago, is that in this industry, there's so many right ways of doing things and not
yeah,
very many ways of doing things wrong, you know? Like,
yeah,
you can solve the same problem like 27 different ways, and who's to say which one of them is best or preferable or whatever? It's like,
yeah.
hey, whatever works. At the end of the day,
Whatever
whatever
works.
works, works. Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, I find this to be one of the things. You know what? I find it to be one of the things that I'm really like hard to accept
Hmm.
sometimes, because I mean,
Are you at the bargaining stage?
no, I'm just I'm just at the stage where like I would like to see the actual reasoning, like, and I want it to make sense to me. You understand? Like, I want it to make sense to me.
Yes.
Like, but I understand like sometimes it doesn't have to, like you said. However, it works in your team, you have to follow the way it works there. So like it is what it is. And everyone knows each team has their own culture because you know experiences, like situations,
Hmm.
code culture, many reasons. So it's just sometimes for me, I feel like the same test that you are doing in your unit test, you are likely going to do it again in the integration test level,
Well,
or
yeah,
like
you replicate more of what you know, so it's
yeah.
true.
So then you do it again, and then you do it the same thing. You do it again in your end-to-end test. So
Yeah.
I just feel like yeah,
I
everyone
think
should
I
have their
think
own
I think one
responsibility.
one thing you kind of have to look into is your motivations for like why are you doing it in the first place? Cuz like in our case originally we had a very bad motivation to do certain things with our tests, and now we're like paying the price for it. So, you have to kind of understand very precisely what it is that you're trying to
Yeah,
achieve and then figure out a
yeah,
way to do it. Because again,
yeah,
as the saying goes, show me the incentives and I show you the outcomes.
yeah, yeah. Honestly, maybe as time goes by, maybe things will start to make more sense to me in this regard. But yeah, this is where I am right now. And, like the other day we were talking more about like security stuff. So I feel like right now some things I'm starting to. I mean, maybe because I have like more responsibilities now to make certain decisions, and yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like I'm starting to think a bit more into certain things and why certain things are like this and like something like that.
Well,
So yeah,
hey, yeah,
we'll
no,
see.
that's good. That's good.
Yeah,
I was incorrect. I thought that the conference is going to be March 3rd, which is like next week, but it
so yeah.
is it is actually April 3rd, so it's like a whole month from now. The
Oh,
security thing that I'm going
yeah.
to. So we're not going to have a chance to talk about it for a while yet.
I mean, it's just a month from now.
Yeah.
That's
Well, that's like
3 weeks
four
from the
four four
next time.
episodes away.
Yeah, just four.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we'll be there.
Not too bad. Not too bad.
Anyway, thank you, Vasili. It
Thanks,
was
Mo.
a really nice conversation today. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I have to go and find a funny picture of you to put in the first 20 minutes of
Oh
our
my God.
conversation.
I'm so sorry. I'm so
You're
sorry,
making me do more work.
I'm so sorry. You know what? I deserve it. Maybe you can find a
Maybe
nice
I'll
Mickey
just like
Mouse.
clone your likeness with some AI and make it narrate based on a text.
You know what? You know what? That could work.
And then I start calling your banks and be like, "Gib money, please. I am a Mo. This is me. Trust me."
This could work, if you could do this, you know what, that might actually be nice. But I deserve any picture you put up, because I don't know how did I do that, but
Well,
I
it's
was
it's
so
been
excited.
it's a Friday evening. It's been a long day and a long week, and everyone's tired. So go and have your dinner,
Yeah.
enjoy your rest, enjoy your weekend,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
everybody. You're probably gonna be watching it on Monday, or maybe not. I mean, I publish those on Monday, so it's not likely not gonna be Friday for you. But you enjoy your weekend too, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.